The boy froze. The guards weren't speaking Italian, they were planning a hit. And the man they were about to kill was already reaching for the car handle. The moment Marco heard Ashford non vedrà domani, Ashford won't see tomorrow, whispered in Italian by the Millionaire's own guards, he knew two things. Someone was about to die, and his 7-year-old warning would either save a life or destroy his family's only chance at survival. What he didn't know was that stopping the car from leaving would trigger a trap 6 months in the making, one where he and his mother were always meant to be the final pieces. Now, with the real mastermind still watching from the shadows, Marco's bravery might have just signed their death warrant. Before we dive in, if you haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for being here. Now, let's dive into the story. Marco Santos had learned to be invisible. At 7 years old, he perfected the art of moving through the Grand Castello Hotel's marbled corridors like a whisper, small enough to slip past the gilded mirrors, quiet enough that the clicking of designer heels never paused for him. He'd memorized which hallways the guests preferred, which service passages his mama used with her cleaning cart, and which corners of the lobby caught the afternoon sun just right for reading the books Mrs. Chun from a concierge desk saved for him. The hotel was his universe. The world outside, with its schools he couldn't afford and children who had fathers and birthday parties, felt like a distant galaxy. Here, among the marble and gold, he existed in the margins. The son of Elena Santos, the housekeeper on the 7th floor. The boy who wasn't supposed to be seen. But Marco saw everything. He saw Mr. Peterson from room 412 slip his wedding ring into his pocket before meeting the woman who wasn't his wife. He saw the night manager pocket tips meant for the valets. He saw the kitchen staff sneak food to the stray cats by the service entrance, their kindness hidden from management. And on this particular Tuesday in October, Marco saw the new guards arrive with Richard Ashford. The name had rippled through the staff like electricity. Richard Ashford. The Richard Ashford. Tech billionaire. Venture capitalist. The man who turned a college dorm room idea into an empire worth $40 billion. He was staying in the presidential suite for 3 nights while negotiating some merger that would make him even richer. Not that Marco understood such things. What Marco understood was the change in atmosphere when powerful people arrived. The manager's voice pitched higher. The staff moved faster. Even the flowers in the lobby seemed to stand straighter. Marco had been sitting in his usual corner near the potted palms, pretending to be invisible while actually being hypervisible, his dark eyes tracking every movement, when Richard Ashford swept through the entrance. The man looked exactly like his photographs. Tall, maybe 45, with silver threading through dark hair. Sharp suit that probably cost more than Mama made in a year. But it was his eyes that caught Marco's attention, gray and distant, like he was perpetually looking at something no one else could see. Not cruel eyes. Just absent. Like he was present in body, but his mind lived in spreadsheets and stock reports. 6 guards flanked him. 6. Marco had never seen anyone with 6 guards before. His mama had paused with her cleaning cart near the elevator bay, her head respectfully lowered as the entourage passed. Marco saw her fingers tighten on the cart handle, the same hands that braided his hair each morning and held him close when thunder frightened him. The same hands that scrubbed toilets and changed sheets for people who never learned her name. One day, he thought fiercely, one day I'll make enough money that Mama never has to clean another toilet. It was a child's dream, impossible and bright. The elevator doors closed on Richard Ashford and his fortress of security. The lobby exhaled. Marco returned to his book, a battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo that Mrs. Chun had given him. For a boy who sees things, she'd said with a knowing smile. That had been 3 hours ago. Now, Marco sat in the service corridor outside the hotel kitchen, doing his homework on an upturned crate while his mama finished her shift. The corridor was his after-school classroom, fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial cleaner and whatever Chef Rodriguez was cooking, but safe. Warm. He was puzzling over a math problem when he heard the voices. Italian. His pencil froze. Marco's nana, his grandmother back in Naples, had taught him Italian during their video calls, her wrinkled face filling the library computer screen every Sunday. She'd insisted he learn the language of their family, filling his head with words that tasted like olive oil and sounded like music. These voices didn't sound like music. Mezzanotte, one said. Midnight. La macchina sarà pronta. The car will be ready. Non può essere collegato a noi. It cannot be connected to us. Marco's breath caught. He carefully set down his pencil, every instinct screaming that he shouldn't be hearing this. He peeked around the corner. 2 guards stood near the service elevator, not the regular hotel security in their burgundy uniforms, but 2 of the new men from Richard Ashford's detail. Dark suits. Earpieces. And speaking Italian in low, urgent tones that suggested secrets. Il capo ha pagato bene, the taller one said, checking his phone. The boss paid well. Ashford non vedrà domani. Ashford won't see tomorrow. Marco's 7-year-old heart slammed against his ribs. They're going to hurt the millionaire. The guards moved away, their conversation fading. Marco sat frozen, his math homework forgotten. His mind raced with fragments of understanding, not all the words, but enough. Enough to know that something terrible was planned. Something involving a car. Something at midnight. His first instinct was to find Mama. But she was on the 7th floor, and these men who smiled professionally at guests while plotting murder. Who would believe a housekeeper's son? The question sat bitter on his tongue. He was invisible, remember? The boy who wasn't supposed to be seen or heard. If he told the hotel manager, would anyone listen? Would they believe him over professional security guards? But Nana's voice echoed in his memory, telling him stories of brave men and women who'd hidden refugees during the war, who'd spoken truth when silence was safer. Marcello, she'd say, using his full name with Italian pronunciation. Being small doesn't mean being powerless. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest truth. Marco made a decision. He would watch. He would wait. And if what he feared was true, if danger was coming for Richard Ashford, he would find a way to warn him. Even if no one believed a 7-year-old invisible boy. Have you ever known something important but felt too small to speak up? What would you do in Marco's position? Share your thoughts below. The rest of the evening crawled by with agonizing slowness. Marco shadowed the Italian guards when he could, always careful, always invisible. He watched them communicate with subtle nods. He saw them position themselves near exits. He noticed how they tracked Richard Ashford's movements with an intensity that felt predatory rather than protective. At 9 p.m., his mama finished her shift. "Come, Mijo," she said tiredly, her accent softening the English. "Time for home." "Mama," Marco said carefully as they walked toward the employee exit, "do you know those new guards with the rich man? The one in the big suite?" Elena's eyes sharpened with maternal instinct. "Why do you ask?" "I heard them speaking Italian." "So? Your Nana speaks Italian." They were talking about a car. And midnight. And... He struggled with how to say it. "Mama, I think they want to hurt him." His mother stopped walking. In the harsh fluorescent light of the service corridor, her face showed every one of her 32 years, the worry lines, the exhaustion, the constant calculation of risk that came with being undocumented in a country that could deport her at any moment. "Marco," she said slowly, crouching to his level, "you must be very careful with such accusations. Those men, they are professional security. If you make trouble, if you say things." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. "But Mama. We cannot afford trouble, Mijo. Do you understand? Your Nana needs her medicine. Our rent is due. We are here on work visa that must be renewed. We cannot." Her voice cracked. "We cannot be noticed for wrong reasons." Marco nodded, throat tight. He understood. Being invisible wasn't just his choice, it was their survival. They took the bus home to their studio apartment in Queens, Marco pressing his face against the window, watching Manhattan's lights blur past. His mama heated leftover rice and beans. They ate in comfortable silence, Marco's mind churning. What if I'm wrong? He thought. What if I misunderstood? But Nana's Italian lessons had been thorough. And the words had been clear. Ashford won't see tomorrow. That night, Marco barely slept. He stared at the ceiling of the small alcove that served as his bedroom, listening to his mama's soft breathing from her bed across the room. At 5 a.m., he made his decision. When they returned to the hotel the next morning, his mama to her cleaning shift, Marco to his corner with his books, he positioned himself where he could watch the presidential suite's private elevator. Richard Ashford emerged at 8 a.m., surrounded by his guards. In daylight, Marco could see the millionaire more clearly. There was something lonely about him despite the crowd of protection. He walked like a man in a bubble, untouched and untouching. Marco followed at a distance as the group moved through the hotel. Richard had meetings in the conference room, a lunch in the restaurant, calls taken in the business center. Throughout it all, the two Italian guards stayed close, professional smiles never wavering. And Marco watched. At 7 p.m., Richard returned to his suite. Marco heard the head of security, an American with a military bearing, brief the evening shift outside the door. "Mr. Ashford has a dinner reservation at Daniel at 8. Car picks him up at 7:45. Standard route, full detail." Marco's pulse quickened. La Mac China. The car. He had less than an hour. The Grand Castello's lobby transformed as evening descended. Chandeliers blazed to life, casting golden light across marble that gleamed like honey. Women in cocktail dresses glided past on stiletto heels. Men in tuxedos checked expensive watches. The air smelled of French perfume and old money. Marco stood near the concierge desk, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. 7:43 p.m. Through the glass entrance doors, he could see the black Mercedes idling at the curb. Sleek. Expensive. Waiting. La Mac China. The two Italian guards stood flanking the car, speaking into their earpieces. From this distance, they looked like every other professional security detail in Manhattan. But Marco had heard their words. He knew what they were. Wolves in expensive suits. "Marco, Mijo, what are you doing here?" His mama appeared beside him, her cleaning cart piled with fresh linens. "I told you to wait in the break room." "Mama, I..." The private elevator chimed. Richard Ashford stepped into the lobby, and Marco's breath caught. The billionaire wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than their annual rent, a silver watch catching the chandelier light. But it was his face that struck Marco, the absolute lack of suspicion, the complete trust that his wealth and security would keep him safe. He had no idea he was walking toward his own execution. "Mijo," his mama began, but Marco was already moving. His small legs carried him across the lobby floor, weaving between guests, his worn sneakers silent on marble that had seen 1,000 expensive shoes. The world narrowed to a single point, Richard Ashford, walking steadily toward the entrance, toward the waiting car, toward death. Security guards tracked Marco's movement. The concierge looked up. His mama called his name, voice sharp with fear. But Marco had spent 7 years being invisible, and he'd learned when invisibility was weakness, not strength. Richard Ashford reached the entrance doors. The doorman moved to open them with a flourish. "Signore." Marco's voice cut through the elegant murmur of the lobby, high and desperate and completely, utterly visible. "Signore, please." Richard paused, one hand on the door. Turned. His gray eyes found Marco, really found him, perhaps for the first time seeing the small boy who'd been a ghost in his peripheral vision. Marco crashed to a stop in front of him, so close he could smell expensive cologne and the starch of a custom-tailored shirt. Up close, the billionaire was taller than he'd imagined, his presence commanding in a way that made Marco feel impossibly small. But Nana had taught him that being small didn't mean being powerless. "Please," Marco gasped, his fingers reaching out and catching the silk of Richard's sleeve. The fabric was so smooth, so foreign compared to everything Marco had ever touched. "Don't get in the car. Per favor, don't get in the car." Richard's eyebrows rose. Behind him, the head of security, a man named Davis with a jaw like granite, stepped forward. "Son, you need to step back." "I heard them." Marco's voice cracked, 7 years old and terrified and desperate to be believed. The guards, the new ones, they were speaking Italian, they said. He stumbled over the words, trying to translate, trying to make this powerful stranger understand. "They said la macchina sarà pronta, the car will be ready. They said Ashford non vedrà domani." His throat closed. He couldn't say it. Couldn't voice the terrible thing. "What does that mean?" Richard asked quietly. His voice was different than Marco expected, not cold, not dismissive. Careful. Controlled. "It means." Marco swallowed hard. "It means you won't see tomorrow." The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Richard Ashford stared down at the small boy clutching his sleeve, at the dark eyes bright with tears and conviction, at the trembling certainty of a child who'd stumbled into adult darkness. For a long moment, nothing moved, not the guests frozen in their paths, not the security detail tensing around them, not the doorman's hand still on the glass door. "Davis," Richard said softly, never breaking eye contact with Marco, "who are the Italian speakers on my detail?" "Sir, this is clearly a misunderstanding." "Who are they?" Davis's jaw tightened. "Moretti and Castellano, sir. They came highly recommended from the security firm we contracted through Silverman's office." "Silverman." Richard's face went very still. "Michael Silverman." Something passed through his expression then, a flash of understanding, of pieces clicking into horrible place. Michael Silverman. His business rival. The man whose company Richard was about to acquire in a hostile takeover that would cost Silverman everything. Marco watched the realization dawn in those gray eyes, watched the billionaire understand that his wealth, his power, his layers of protection hadn't kept him safe at all. That danger had walked beside him, smiled at him, called him sir while plotting murder. "The car," Richard said slowly. "What exactly did they say about the car?" Marco's voice steadied, drawing on every Italian lesson, every Sunday with Nana. "Il capo ha pagato bene, the boss paid well. Non può essere collegato a noi, it cannot be connected to us." They said it for midnight, but I heard them this morning too, checking their phones, saying stasera, tonight. They were making sure everything was ready. Jesus. Davis had gone pale. "Sir, if this is true. If this is true, then 2 men I've trusted with my life for 3 days are planning to kill me." Richard's voice was remarkably calm, but his hand, the one that wasn't being gripped by Marco's small fingers, had formed a fist. And if a 7-year-old boy hadn't been brave enough to speak up. He didn't finish. He looked down at Marco again, really looked, seeing not an invisible child but a person who'd saved his life. "What's your name?" Richard asked. "Marco Santos, signore." "Marco." Richard crouched down, bringing himself to eye level, and suddenly he wasn't a billionaire or a tech mogul or a man with 6 guards. He was just a person, speaking to another person. "Where did you learn Italian?" "My nana. My grandmother, in Naples. She teaches me on video calls." Marco's voice wobbled. "She says knowing languages gives you power. She says sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest truth." Something cracked in Richard's expression. "Your grandmother is a wise woman." Through the glass doors, Marco could see the Italian guards shifting position by the car. One checked his watch. The other spoke into his earpiece, scanning the lobby. "Looking for Richard." looking for their target. Mama, Marco whispered, suddenly remembering. He turned to find Elena Santos standing 10 feet away, frozen with her cleaning cart, her face ashen with terror. Not terror of the guards, terror of what this meant for them. For their visa. For their survival. Richard followed Marco's gaze and understood immediately. He stood, his hand now settling on Marco's shoulder, protective, anchoring. Davis, Richard said, his voice taking on the commanding tone of a man who'd built an empire, I want Moretti and Castellano detained immediately, but quietly. Get the NYPD here, detectives not uniforms. Contact Agent Morrison at the FBI, he owes me a favor. And get building security to lock down the lobby exits. No one leaves until we sort this out. Sir. Now. Davis pulled out his phone, moving quickly. The other guards, Americans, Marco noticed, who'd been with Richard longer, formed a protective circle. Richard looked back at Marco and Elena. Mrs. Santos, he said directly to Marco's mama, his voice gentler now, your son just saved my life. Whatever you're afraid of right now, visa status, employment, anything, I promise you it's handled. You have my word. Elena's lips trembled. Senor, we don't want trouble. You don't have trouble. You have my protection. Both of you. Richard squeezed Marco's shoulder. And my eternal gratitude. Outside through the glass, Marco saw one of the Italian guards press his earpiece, listening to something. His expression shifted, confusion, then alarm. He turned to his partner, speaking rapidly. They knew something was wrong. They know, Marco breathed. Richard saw it too. Davis. But it was too late. The two guards exchanged a glance, a split second of communication, and then they moved. Not toward the hotel, but away from it, melting into the Manhattan evening crowd with the practiced ease of men who'd planned escape routes. Don't let them, Richard started, but Davis was already barking orders into his radio, already coordinating with hotel security. Marco watched through the glass as the guards disappeared into the river of pedestrians, briefcases swinging, just two more Manhattan businessmen heading home. Within seconds, they were gone. The lobby erupted into controlled chaos. Police arrived within minutes, real detectives in suits, asking questions, taking statements. The FBI agent Richard mentioned arrived 40 minutes later, treating this not as an attempted crime but as something bigger, something that suggested conspiracy and interstate coordination. Through it all, Marco sat on a velvet settee in the lobby, his mama beside him, wrapped in a shock blanket someone had provided though he wasn't cold. He watched Richard Ashford be interviewed, watched him point at the abandoned Mercedes that was now surrounded by police, watched as bomb-sniffing dogs circled the vehicle with tense handlers. Clear, someone finally called. No explosives. They weren't planning a bomb, Richard said quietly, walking back to where Marco sat. He settled into the chair across from them, suddenly looking exhausted. They were planning an accident. Take me to dinner, staged car crash on the route, blame it on a drunk driver or mechanical failure. No one would question it. Tragic death of a billionaire. Silverman's takeover fails, his company survives. He ran a hand through his silver-threaded hair. And I would have gotten into that car without a second thought. Marco found his voice. Why didn't you believe your guards when they said I was wrong? Richard studied him for a long moment. Do you know what I've learned in 25 years of building companies, Marco? The most important information rarely comes from the people you're paying to give it to you. It comes from the people you're not paying attention to. He smiled, sad and real. I almost made that mistake today. I almost ignored you because you're 7 years old and the son of a housekeeper. I almost trusted men because they wore expensive suits and came recommended. He leaned forward. You saved my life by being brave enough to be seen. By trusting that the truth mattered more than your safety. Nana taught me, Marco said simply. Then your Nana taught you well. Trust and intuition. Have you ever had to make a split-second decision to trust or not trust someone? What made you choose? Drop your story in the comments. The FBI agent approached, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Ashford, we need you to come to the field office for a formal statement. We've got units searching for Moretti and Castellano, but they were professionals. Likely already out of the city. I understand. Richard stood, then paused. Agent Morrison, the boy and his mother, they need protection. If Silverman was willing to have me killed, he won't hesitate to tie up loose ends. Morrison's expression sharpened. Agreed. We'll place them in protective custody until... No. Richard's voice was firm. They stay with me. I have a secure property in Connecticut, full security detail, vetted security this time. They'll be safer there than in a federal safe house, and... He looked at Marco. I owe them more than just safety. Elena spoke for the first time since the police arrived, her English careful but clear. Senor Ashford, we cannot impose. Mrs. Santos, 2 hours ago I had 6 guards and thought I was untouchable. Now I have 4 guards I actually trust, and I'm alive because your 7-year-old son speaks Italian and has more courage than most grown men I know. Richard's voice was gentle but unyielding. You're not imposing. You're accepting the protection and gratitude you've earned. Please. Marco looked up at his mama, saw the conflict in her face, pride and fear and hope warring together. Then she looked down at him, at her small son who'd risked everything to save a stranger, and he saw her decision crystallize. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The next 3 hours blurred together. Police interviews. FBI statements. Phone calls to lawyers and security companies. Marco dozed against his mama's shoulder, exhausted by adrenaline crash, waking occasionally to catch fragments of conversation. Silverman's been taken into custody for questioning. Burner phones found in Moretti's hotel room, communications with an encrypted. The boy's testimony is credible, especially combined with the evidence we're finding. At 2 a.m., they left the hotel in a convoy of black SUVs, real security this time, vetted and trusted. Marco sat in the back seat between his mama and Richard Ashford, watching Manhattan lights blur past, thinking how just yesterday his biggest worry had been a math problem. Now he'd saved a billionaire's life. Now they were driving to Connecticut in the middle of the night. Now everything had changed. Marco, Richard said quietly, his voice barely audible over the vehicle's engine. When we get to the house, there's someone I want you to meet. Her name is Emma. She's my daughter. She's 8 years old and she. He paused, choosing words carefully. She hasn't spoken in 6 months. Not since her mother died. Marco turned to look at him, saw grief written in the lines around those gray eyes. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. It's psychological. Trauma. She just stopped talking. Richard's voice cracked slightly. I've hired the best therapists, the best specialists. Nothing helps. She lives in a world of silence now, and I don't know how to reach her. Why are you telling me this? Marco asked. Because you did something today that I haven't been able to do in 25 years of business. You saw what everyone else missed. You trusted your instincts when it would have been easier to stay silent. You were brave when you had every reason to be afraid. Richard looked at him directly. I think maybe Emma needs someone like you. Someone who understands that sometimes being small doesn't mean being powerless. Marco nodded slowly, not fully understanding but sensing the weight of what was being asked of him. They drove on into the darkness, leaving behind the city of lights and danger, heading toward something unknown. Marco felt his mama's hand squeeze his, felt the warmth of her presence beside him. Outside the window, the darkness seemed less frightening somehow. He'd been brave once today. Maybe he could be brave again. The Ashford estate materialized from the Connecticut darkness like something from a fairy tale, or a dream Marco wasn't sure he was ready to wake from. Wrought iron gates opened onto a tree-lined driveway that curved for what felt like miles. Security lights illuminated manicured lawns that stretched endlessly into shadow. The house itself, calling it a house felt inadequate, rose 3 stories of stone and glass, windows glowing with warm light that made the November cold seem distant. Marco pressed his face against the SUV window, breath fogging the glass. Mama, he whispered. It's like a castle. Elena squeezed his hand, but said nothing. Her face reflected in the dark window showed wonder mixed with deeper worry. They were entering a world that wasn't theirs, and both of them knew that worlds this different had gravitational pulls that could trap you or spit you out. The SUV stopped beneath a covered portico. Richard's head of security, Davis, had been replaced by a woman named Catherine Reeves, her credentials apparently impeccable, opened the door. Welcome to Ashford House, Richard said, climbing out and extending a hand to help Elena. His exhaustion was visible now, the adrenaline of the evening fading into bone-deep weariness. I know it's overwhelming. Trust me, it still overwhelms me sometimes, and I've lived here for 5 years. They entered through massive oak doors into a foyer that made Marco's breath catch. A chandelier the size of their entire studio apartment hung from a vaulted ceiling. A curved staircase swept upward, its banister gleaming. Paintings, real paintings, not prints, lined the walls. But what struck Marco most was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of sleep, but something heavier. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something it had lost. Mr. Ashford. An older woman appeared from a side hallway, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, her face kind but careworn. I've prepared the guest rooms in the East Wing as you requested. And I checked on Emma, she's asleep. Thank you, Margaret. Richard turned to Marco and Elena. This is Margaret Chun, my housekeeper and the person who actually runs this house. Margaret, this is Elena Santos and her son Marco. They'll be staying with us for, well, as long as necessary. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, recognition of Elena as a fellow domestic worker perhaps, or simply surprise at 3 a.m. house guests, but her professionalism held. Of course. I'll make sure they have everything they need. Margaret is Mrs. Chen's sister, Richard added, and Marco's head snapped up. From the hotel concierge desk. You're Mrs. Chen's sister? Marco asked, amazed at this impossible connection. Margaret smiled, the expression warming her tired face. I am. And she's told me all about you, young man. The boy who reads the Count of Monte Cristo in the service corridors. She glanced at Richard. My sister has good instincts about people. She said you were special. Marco felt his cheeks warm. Margaret, before you show them to their rooms, I'd like Marco to meet Emma. Just briefly. Richard's voice carried a note of uncertainty Marco hadn't heard before. Would that be all right? Margaret and Elena exchanged a glance, two women who understood children and the delicate nature of introduction and trauma. It's very late, Elena began carefully. I know. But Emma often wakes around this time. Nightmares. Richard's face showed the helpless pain of a parent watching their child suffer. If she's awake, I'd like her to meet the boy who saved my life. Maybe it would help her understand that there's still good in the world. That people can still be brave. The unspoken plea hung in the air. Maybe it will help her find her voice again. Elena looked down at Marco. Mijo, are you too tired? Marco was exhausted. Every bone ached with a weariness that felt like it went deeper than physical. But he remembered Richard's words in the car, about a girl who'd stopped speaking, about a father who didn't know how to reach his daughter. He understood loss, in his own way. He'd lost his father, not to death but to abandonment, to a man who decided fatherhood was too hard and disappeared when Marco was 3. He'd lost his Nana's daily presence to an ocean and visa restrictions. He understood the ache of silence where words should be. I'm not too tired, he said. They climbed the curved staircase, Richard leading, Margaret following with a knowing expression. The second floor was quieter than the first, the hallway lined with closed doors and family photographs that Marco glimpsed in passing. Richard and a beautiful woman with dark hair and bright eyes, a small girl between them, all three laughing in sunlight. A family that had been whole. Richard stopped at a door painted pale blue, knocked softly. Emma? Sweetheart, are you awake? Silence. Then, a small sound, fabric rustling, bare feet on hardwood. The door opened. Emma Ashford was small for 8, thin in a way that suggested grief had stolen her appetite. Dark hair, her mother's hair, Marco thought, remembering the photograph, hung past her shoulders in tangles that suggested she'd been tossing in sleep. But it was her eyes that struck him most, gray like her father's, but where Richard's were distant, hers were haunted. She looked at Marco, then at the adults, her expression wary. Emma, this is Marco, Richard said gently, crouching to her level. He's going to be staying with us for a while. He and his mother. Marco did something very brave tonight. He saved my life. Emma's eyes widened, flickering between Marco and her father. Marco speaks Italian, Richard continued. His grandmother taught him. And he loves books. Margaret said he reads The Count of Monte Cristo. Emma studied Marco with an intensity that felt older than 8. Then she stepped back, pulled open her door wider, an invitation. Her room was beautiful in the way rooms are when they're designed by adults trying to make a child happy. A 4-poster bed with gauzy curtains. Shelves lined with toys and books. A window seat overlooking gardens illuminated by moonlight. But it felt unused somehow, like a stage set no one performed on. Emma walked to her bookshelf, pulled out a volume, brought it to Marco. He looked down at the cover, The Secret Garden. You like this one? Marco asked. Emma nodded. She pointed to a specific page, then gestured for Marco to sit on the window seat. He did, and she settled beside him, the book open between them. Marco understood. She wanted him to read. He glanced at Richard, who nodded, his eyes bright with something like hope. When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, Marco began, his 7-year-old voice careful with the words, everybody said she was the most disagreeable-looking child ever seen. He read for 10 minutes, Emma pressed against his side, her eyes following the words. She didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but her breathing slowed, her small body relaxing incrementally. When Marco's voice grew tired, he stopped. Should I keep going? Emma shook her head. She closed the book carefully, set it aside. Then she did something that made Richard's breath catch audibly. She pulled a notebook from beneath her pillow, spiral-bound, the cover worn from use, and a pencil. She wrote something, showed it to Marco. Thank you for saving my dad. Marco's throat tightened. You're welcome. Emma wrote again. Why were you brave? The question was so direct, so simple, that Marco didn't have a prepared answer. He thought about it, really thought, while this silent girl waited for truth. Because my nana taught me that being small doesn't mean being powerless, he said finally. And because sometimes the right thing is scary, but you do it anyway. Because. He struggled for words. Because some things are worth being brave for. Emma stared at him for a long moment. Then she wrote, I want to be brave too. But I don't know how anymore. The words hit like physical blows. Richard made a small sound, turning away, his shoulders tight with controlled grief. Marco looked at this girl who'd lost her mother, who'd retreated into silence, who lived in a beautiful room that felt like a prison. He thought about his own fears, of being invisible, of not mattering, of losing his mama the way Emma had lost her mother. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Marco said quietly. My mama taught me that. It means you're scared but you do the thing anyway. And sometimes being brave is small things. Like opening your door when someone knocks. Like sitting with a stranger and sharing your book. Like writing your feelings even when speaking them is too hard. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You're already braver than you think, Marco continued. You're still here. You're still trying. That's brave. A single tear rolled down Emma's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but not before Marco saw. Then she wrote again, her pencil pressing hard into the paper. Will you stay? Will you be my friend? Yes, Marco said immediately. I'll stay. I'll be your friend. Emma's lips trembled into something that might have been a smile. She nodded, closed her notebook, and for the first time since they'd entered, she looked at her father. Richard moved forward, knelt beside the window seat, gathered his daughter into his arms. Emma buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with silent sobs, grief or relief or both. Marco stood carefully, giving them privacy. Margaret touched his shoulder, guided him toward the door. Elena waited in the hallway, her eyes wet. You did good, Mijo, she whispered, pulling him close. So good. They were shown to their rooms, a suite, actually, with 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting area that was bigger than their entire apartment. Marco barely registered the luxury. He was too tired, too emotionally wrung out. But sleep, when it came, was restless. He dreamed of Italian voices in dark corridors, of guards with wolves' eyes, of Emma's silent tears and her words written in desperate pencil, I want to be brave too. He woke at dawn to find sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked ground so vast they seemed to stretch to the horizon. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then it all rushed back, the warning, the police, the drive into darkness, the silent girl with haunted eyes. His mama was already awake, sitting in the suite's living area with coffee someone had delivered. Good morning, Mijo. Morning, Mama. He climbed onto the sofa beside her. Is this real? Are we really here? I think so. Though it feels like a dream, doesn't it? She stroked his hair, her touch familiar and grounding. Mr. Ashford's lawyer called an hour ago. He wants to meet with us this morning. He says Mr. Ashford wants to discuss our situation. Marco heard the worry in her voice, the uncertainty of what situation meant when you were undocumented workers who'd witnessed an attempted murder. A knock at the door interrupted. Margaret entered with a breakfast tray. Good morning. Mr. Ashford asks if you'll join him for breakfast at 8. Emma will be there too, she requested it specifically. She wrote a note. She handed Marco a folded paper. He opened it. Please come to breakfast. I want to show you the gardens. She's already more communicative than she's been in months, Margaret said softly. Whatever you did last night, young man, it meant something. Breakfast was served in a sunroom that overlooked those impossible gardens. Richard looked better rested, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that made him seem more approachable. Emma sat beside him in pajamas and a robe, her notebook ever present. Good morning, Richard greeted them warmly. Please sit. I hope you slept well. Very well, thank you, Elena said carefully, taking a seat. Marco slid into the chair beside Emma, who immediately pushed her notebook toward him. I had a good dream. First one in a long time. What did you dream about? Marco asked. She wrote, a garden where everything was growing. And voices singing in Italian. Marco smiled. Nana sings in Italian. She says Italian is the language of music and poetry. Emma wrote, will you teach me? Italian, I mean. Like your Nana taught you. If you want to learn, I'll teach you, Marco promised. Richard watched this exchange with barely concealed emotion. Marco, Elena, I wanted to talk to you both about your future. I've spoken with my lawyers, and... His phone buzzed. Then again. And again in rapid succession. His expression shifted from warmth to concern to something harder. He checked the screen, and Marco saw his jaw tighten. What is it? Margaret asked, reading his face. Richard looked up, his eyes finding Marco's. Agent Morrison just sent me an alert. Moretti and Castellano, they found Moretti's body an hour ago. Shot execution style in a warehouse in Newark. Castellano is still missing. The sunroom's warmth evaporated. Elena's hand found Marco's shoulder, protective and frightened. Silverman. Richard asked into his phone, having dialed immediately. What about Silverman? A pause. I see. When? Another pause, longer. Jesus Christ. Yes, I understand. No, we're secure here. Catherine has the full detail on property. Yes, the family is, yes, including the boy. Right. Keep me updated. He lowered the phone slowly. Michael Silverman was found dead in his holding cell 2 hours ago. Apparent suicide, but they're investigating. Richard's voice was carefully controlled, the businessman reasserting itself over the shaken man. Which means whoever hired Moretti and Castellano is still out there. And they're cleaning up loose ends. Sometimes solving one danger reveals a deeper threat. Have you ever thought you were safe, only to discover the danger wasn't over? Share your experience below. Marco and Emma's story continues, and your thoughts might help them. Marco felt ice in his stomach. But if Mr. Silverman is dead, then who? That's what the FBI is trying to determine. Richard looked at Emma, then at Marco, his gray eyes shadowed with new worry. Silverman may have been the client, but someone else was the architect. Someone with enough reach to kill a man in federal custody. Someone who knew Silverman was talking or about to talk. Catherine Reeves appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "Sir, I've doubled the perimeter detail. We're secure, but I recommend no one leaves the property," Richard finished. "Agreed. And Catherine, I want background checks run again on everyone. Staff, security, vendors. Everyone." "Already in motion, sir." As Catherine left, Emma tugged Marco's sleeve. He looked at her notebook. "Are we in danger?" Marco glanced at his mama, then at Richard. He wanted to lie, to say everything was fine. But Emma deserved truth. "I think maybe we are," he said quietly. "But we're together. And we're going to be brave, remember?" Emma nodded slowly. She wrote, "Together is better than alone." "It is," Marco agreed. Richard stood, walking to the sunroom windows that overlooked the estate. "I built this place to be a sanctuary. After my wife died, I wanted somewhere Emma could feel safe, could heal. Now I've brought danger right to our doorstep." "You didn't bring danger," Elena said firmly, her English careful but clear. "Bad men brought danger. You are protecting us. There is difference." Richard turned to look at her, and Marco saw gratitude in his face. "Thank you, Mrs. Santos. I needed to hear that." The rest of the morning passed in strange limbo. FBI agents arrived, asking more questions, taking more statements. Security personnel patrolled the grounds in visible pairs. Marco and Emma retreated to the library, a room lined floor to ceiling with books that made Marco's heart sing despite his fear, and tried to distract themselves with stories. Emma wrote, "In the books, the good guys always win. In real life too," Marco said with more confidence than he felt. "Eventually." "Eventually is scary though." "Yeah," Marco admitted. "It is." They sat in comfortable silence, Emma sketching in her notebook while Marco pretended to read. His mind kept replaying the past 24 hours, looking for patterns, for missed details. Something bothered him, nagging at the edges of his thoughts. The Italian guards had been too professional, too careful. They'd planned everything meticulously, the car, the route, the timing. But they'd made one mistake. They'd spoken Italian in a hotel service corridor, assuming no one was listening. Why would professionals make that mistake? Unless... Marco sat up straight. "Emma, can I borrow your notebook?" She handed it over, curious. Marco flipped to a blank page and started writing, organizing his thoughts. 1. Guard spoke Italian in service corridor 2. They didn't know anyone was listening. 3. But they checked for cameras, for phones. 4. Why be careful about everything except language? He chewed the pencil, thinking. His nana had taught him that language was power, but also camouflage. You spoke your native tongue when you didn't want others to understand, but you also spoke it when you forgot to be careful, when you felt safe. 5. They felt safe speaking Italian. 6. They didn't think anyone in the hotel would understand. 7. But what if? The thought crystallized, terrifying and clear. 8. What if they wanted someone to understand? 9. What if they wanted to be stopped? "No," Marco whispered. "That doesn't make sense. Why plan murder if you want to be stopped?" Emma touched his arm, pointed at what he'd written, then wrote, "Unless stopping them was part of the plan?" Marco stared at her. At this 8-year-old girl who didn't speak but saw clearly. "Unless stopping them was part of the plan," he repeated slowly. "But why? What would that accomplish?" Emma wrote, "Dad stopped trusting his security. Dad is scared now. Dad brought us here, away from city, away from witnesses." She stopped writing, looked at Marco with growing horror in her gray eyes. Marco felt his blood turn to ice. "Your dad brought us here to protect us. Because we're witnesses. Because we saw the guards, heard them, can identify them. We're the only ones who can prove what really happened." Emma nodded, her pencil moving frantically. "What if getting us here was the real plan? What if we're not safer here? What if this is where they wanted us all along?" The library door opened. Margaret stood in the doorway, her kind face apologetic. "Marco, Emma, your father wants you both in his study. Right away." Something in her tone made Marco's skin prickle. Too careful. Too controlled. "Is everything okay?" Marco asked. "Everything's fine." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just some questions the FBI needs answered. Your mother's already there, Marco." Emma gripped Marco's hand, her fingers cold. She showed him her notebook one more time. "Don't go." But what choice did they have? They followed Margaret through the mansion's halls, past windows that showed Catherine Reeves and her security team patrolling the grounds. Normal. Everything looked normal. But Marco's instincts, the same instincts that had saved Richard Ashford's life, screamed that something was wrong. Margaret led them to a heavy oak door, knocked once. "Sir? I have the children." "Send them in," came Richard's voice from inside. Margaret opened the door. Marco and Emma stepped into the study, A room of leather and dark wood and the smell of old books, and stopped. Richard sat behind his desk, his face pale, his hands flat on the polished surface. Elena sat in a chair beside him, her expression rigid with fear. And standing behind them, a gun held casually but unmistakably at the ready, was a man Marco didn't recognize. Mid-50s, gray suit, the face of someone used to power and comfortable with violence. "Hello Marco," the man said, his voice pleasant. "I've been very eager to meet you. The boy who speaks Italian and saved Richard Ashford's life." He smiled. "My name is Thomas Reeves. Catherine is my daughter. And you've just walked into a trap 6 months in the making." The door clicked shut behind them. Marco's heart stopped. Emma's hand tightened in his until it hurt. And Thomas Reeves's smile widened. "Now, let's talk about what happens next." Marco's mind raced, fragments of understanding clicking into place like puzzle pieces he'd been holding without knowing their shape. Catherine Reeves. Head of security. The woman Richard had trusted to replace Davis. And standing behind Richard with a gun was Thomas Reeves, her father. "I can see you working it out," Thomas said, his voice carrying the patience of a man who'd already won. "You're a clever boy. Much cleverer than anyone anticipated. That's why we're in this situation now, instead of reading about Richard Ashford's tragic accident in tomorrow's papers." Richard's jaw was tight, his gray eyes burning with controlled fury. "Thomas, whatever you think you're accomplishing." "What I'm accomplishing, Richard, is 25 years of careful planning finally coming to fruition." Thomas moved around the desk with casual confidence, his gun never wavering. "You don't remember me, do you?" "Of course you don't. I was junior counsel at Meridian Tech when you stole the algorithm that built your entire empire." Marco saw Richard's face shift, recognition, then shock. "That algorithm was mine," Thomas continued, his pleasant tone hardening. "My code. My innovation. But you were the golden boy with the venture capital connections and the Harvard pedigree. You took my work, filed the patents under your name, and built $40 billion on my stolen foundation. And what did I get? A severance package and an NDA. That was litigated," Richard said quietly. "You lost. The courts ruled. The courts ruled that money beats truth." Thomas's smile was razor-sharp. "But I'm a patient man, Richard. I spent 25 years building my own security empire, making connections, waiting for the perfect moment. When your wife died, tragic car accident, such a terrible loss, I saw opportunity." Emma made a small sound. Marco squeezed her hand, feeling her tremble. "You were vulnerable," Thomas continued. "Grieving. Desperate to protect your daughter. So my company reached out, offering comprehensive security services. And you accepted because Catherine is exceptional at her job. She really is. I trained her well. For years, she's been your most trusted protection, learning your patterns, your vulnerabilities, your secrets." "The guards," Marco whispered, understanding flooding through him. "Moretti and Castellano, they worked for you." Thomas turned his gaze to Marco, and the boy saw intelligence there mixed with something colder. "Very good. Yes, they worked for me. Expendable assets who spoke Italian because I knew there was a housekeeper at the Grand Castello whose son was being raised by an Italian grandmother. A boy who spent his afternoons in service corridors where security guards might speak freely." The room spun. Marco felt his mama's eyes on him, wide with horror. You wanted me to hear them," Marco said, his 7-year-old voice thin. "You planned it." "I planned everything." Thomas's pride was evident. "I needed Richard to distrust his security, to be frightened, to bring potential witnesses somewhere isolated where they could be." He paused delicately. "Dealt with. The hotel was public, too many cameras, too many variables. But here? His own estate? Perfect." Richard's hands had formed fists on the desk. "You killed your own men." Moretti was going to talk. He developed a conscience, unfortunate in this line of work. Castellano will be found in a few days, equally dead. Silverman was never anything but a convenient scapegoat, and now he's a silent one. Thomas shrugged. "Loose ends, Richard. I learned from you, always tie up loose ends." "What do you want?" Elena spoke for the first time, her voice shaking but fierce. "You want money? You want revenge? Okay. But let the children go. They are innocent." "The children," Thomas said thoughtfully, "are the most valuable pieces on the board right now. Marco is the only witness who can connect the Italian guards to a plot against Richard's life. Emma is Richard's only heir. And you, Mrs. Santos, are leverage to control Marco." He moved to the window, looking out at the grounds where Catherine Reeves's security teams patrolled in perfect formation. "Catherine has been planning this endgame for months. Every member of the security detail here is loyal to us. The FBI thinks Richard is safe behind walls and guards. They don't know the walls are prison bars and the guards are his executioners." "The FBI knows I'm here," Richard said. "Agent Morrison. Agent Morrison thinks you're secure and will check in tomorrow morning. By then, the story will be written, tragic home invasion. Richard Ashford, his daughter, 2 house guests, all killed by intruders who somehow breached security. Catherine will be the devastated head of security who failed to protect her client. And I'll be the grieving father of a daughter who died trying to do her job. Thomas turned back to face them. The evidence will point to Castellano as the intruder. His body will be found on the property, killed in the firefight. Clean. Tragic. And no one will question it because Catherine's reputation is impeccable. Marco's mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be something he could do. He was small, he was 7, but he'd been brave once before. He could be brave again. His eyes found Emma's. She was watching him with those haunted gray eyes, but there was something else there now, not just fear but determination. She pulled out her notebook, scribbled something quickly, showed it only to Marco while Thomas was looking at Richard. Service passages. Margaret showed me. Behind the bookshelf. Marco's heart leaped. Service passages. Like the hotel. Ways for servants to move unseen through a house designed to hide them. He gave Emma the tiniest nod. You won't get away with this, Richard said, drawing Thomas's attention. Even if you kill us all, someone will figure it out. The FBI will investigate and find exactly what I want them to find. Thomas checked his watch. Catherine is coordinating the timeline now. At 9 p.m., in approximately 3 hours, the home invasion will occur. Which means we have time to make this look convincing. Struggle. Fear. All the markers of a real attack. You're insane, Richard breathed. I'm patient. There's a difference. Thomas raised his gun slightly. Now we're going to move to the basement, all of you. Soundproof, secure, and when Catherine stages the crime scene later, your bodies will be found where they should be. Victims trying to hide from intruders. He gestured toward the door. Mrs. Santos, you first. Then Richard. Children last, and don't try anything clever. I've been planning this for longer than you've been alive. Elena stood slowly, her face ashen. Richard followed, his movements careful, controlled. Marco saw him calculating angles, odds, possibilities. But with a gun trained on his daughter, what could he do? Marco and Emma stood together, hand in hand. Marco's mind raced through possibilities. The service passage was behind the bookshelf, but Thomas stood between them and it. Even if they ran, they were children, small, slow compared to an adult with a gun. They needed a distraction. They moved toward the door in silent procession. Thomas followed, his gun steady, his confidence absolute. He'd planned everything perfectly. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated the bravery of children who'd already decided to be brave. As they reached the doorway, Emma stumbled, deliberately, Marco realized, falling against the door frame with a cry that was soundless but dramatic. Thomas's attention flickered to her for a split second. Marco moved. He didn't run for the door or for his mama. He ran toward the desk, grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight he'd noticed earlier, and threw it with all his 7-year-old strength, not at Thomas but at the window. Glass exploded outward with a crash that echoed like thunder. And outside, where Catherine Reeves's security teams patrolled, heads snapped toward the sound. You little, Thomas spun toward Marco, rage replacing confidence. Richard moved faster than Marco had ever seen an adult move. He grabbed Thomas's gun hand, forcing it upward. The gun discharged, a deafening crack, the bullet embedding in the ceiling. Run. Richard shouted. Emma, Marco, run. Emma was already moving, pulling Marco toward the bookshelf. Her small hands found a hidden catch, Margaret had shown her well, and a section of the shelf swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. Mama. Marco cried. Elena was frozen between Thomas and Richard struggling for the gun, and the children in the doorway. Her face showed the terrible calculation of a mother, save herself or save her son. Go, she screamed. Marco, go. I'll find you. Another gunshot. Richard and Thomas crashed against the desk, locked in desperate combat. Emma pulled Marco into the darkness of the service passage. The bookshelf swung shut behind them, muffling the sounds of struggle, leaving them in a narrow corridor that smelled of old wood and dust. For a moment, they stood in darkness, hearts pounding, ears ringing from the gunshots. Then Emma tugged Marco forward. In the thin light seeping through cracks in the wall panels, he could see her moving with surprising confidence. She'd explored these passages before, he realized. In her silent months, while everyone else worried, she'd learned the hidden geography of her own home. She led him through narrow turns, past concealed panels that showed glimpses of other rooms, down a tight staircase that seemed to burrow into the house's bones. Marco followed blindly, trusting this silent girl who'd found bravery when she needed it most. Behind them, faintly, he heard shouting. Running footsteps. Catherine Reeves's voice, sharp with command, locked down the house. Find them. The hunt had begun. They emerged from the passage into what looked like an old wine cellar. Stone walls, dusty bottles, the smell of earth and age. Emma pulled Marco behind a rack of bottles, pressing a finger to her lips. Footsteps overhead. Voices calling their names. Catherine's security teams were searching, but they didn't know about the passages. Not yet. Emma opened her notebook with shaking hands, wrote, "We need help. FBI. Police. But all phones are controlled by Catherine's people. Marco thought furiously. They were trapped in a house where every exit was guarded by people who wanted them dead. His mama was somewhere above with Richard, maybe hurt, maybe worse. And in 3 hours, Catherine would stage a massacre that would look like a home invasion. Unless they could get help. Unless they could be brave one more time. The panic room, Marco whispered, remembering something Richard had mentioned during the morning's FBI meeting. Your dad said there's a panic room with independent communication. Where is it? Emma's eyes widened. She wrote quickly, master bedroom. Behind the closet. Dad showed me after Mom died. But Catherine knows about it too. Does she know how to get in? Emma hesitated, then wrote, needs fingerprint and code. Only Dad and I have clearance. Marco's mind raced. We need to get your dad there. Or get you there so you can call for help. But the bedroom, that's on the 3rd floor, right? We're in the basement. Emma nodded, her face pale in the dim light filtering through a ground-level window. The passages, Marco said. Can they get us there without going through the main house? Emma thought, then started drawing in her notebook, a crude map of the house, the passages she'd explored. Marco watched the sketch take shape, seeing the hidden veins of the mansion, the servant routes that connected floors and wings. There, he pointed. That passage goes near the master bedroom? Emma nodded, wrote, yes. But there's a gap, one section where we have to cross the main hallway. 20 feet. Catherine's people will see us. Then we need another distraction. Marco looked at the wine cellar, at the dusty bottles and old wood racks, at the narrow window that showed a ground-level view of the gardens. Something that makes them all look somewhere else. An idea formed, dangerous, probably stupid, but he was 7 years old and terrified and running out of options. Emma, do these passages have exits to outside? She nodded, wrote, service door near the kitchen. Also old coal chute to gardens. The coal chute, could we get something through it? Something loud. Emma's eyes showed understanding. She wrote, like what? Marco looked around the cellar, thinking. Then he saw it, an old fire alarm panel, the kind that connected to sprinkler systems and external bells. The kind that would trigger throughout the house and grounds, sending security teams running to check for fire. If we pull that alarm, Marco said slowly, Catherine's people have to respond, right? They can't ignore a possible fire, too suspicious if someone's watching from outside. Emma wrote, but Dad and your mom are still trapped with Thomas upstairs. I know. Marco's voice shook. But if we can get to the panic room, call the FBI, tell them what's really happening. Agent Morrison can get here with real help. Police. SWAT. People who aren't working for Thomas. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote, it's risky. Everything is risky, Marco said, echoing words his nana had once told him. But doing nothing is riskiest of all. Emma nodded slowly. Then she wrote one more thing. Together? Together, Marco agreed. They moved to the fire alarm. Marco's small hand hovered over the pull handle, his heart hammering. Once they did this, there was no going back. Catherine would know they were in the passages, would know they were trying something. The hunt would intensify. But they'd be brave. They'd be brave for his mama, for Richard, for each other. Marco pulled the alarm. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Bells erupted throughout the mansion, ear-splitting, impossible to ignore. Overhead, running footsteps thundered. Catherine's voice shouted orders. Fire teams go. Check all floors. Security, maintain perimeter. Emma grabbed Marco's hand and pulled him back into the passages. They ran through darkness, Emma navigating from memory, taking turns Marco couldn't have found alone. The bells muffled other sounds, making the passages feel like they existed outside normal space, a liminal zone between the house's public face and its hidden truth. They climbed narrow stairs, passed through walls where they could hear Catherine's team searching rooms, calling clear, and moving on. The fire alarm had done exactly what Marco hoped, created mandatory protocols that pulled security away from their posts, at least temporarily. They reached a junction where Emma stopped, pointed through a crack. Marco pressed his eye to it and saw the 3rd-floor hallway, long carpeted, lined with doors. And 20 feet from where they hid, the master bedroom entrance. 2 guards stood outside it. Emma wrote, we're trapped. Can't get past them. Marco thought frantically. The alarm was still ringing, but security teams would soon realize there was no fire. They'd return to positions. The window of distraction was closing. Then he heard it, a voice from the other side of the wall, inside the master bedroom. Richard's voice, ragged but alive. Not telling you anything, Thomas. You'll have to kill me first. That's the plan. Thomas's voice, cold now, the pleasant facade gone. But first you're going to open the panic room. I know it's in here. Catherine confirmed it. And you're going to give me access before you die. Marco's breath caught. Thomas had brought Richard to the bedroom. Had forced him here to access the panic room, the one place in the house with independent communications. Emma's eyes met Marco's. She pointed at her notebook. If Dad opens it, Thomas kills him and destroys the communications. If Dad doesn't open it, Thomas kills him anyway. They were out of time. Out of options. Marco looked at the guards in the hallway, at the impossible 20 feet between the passage and the bedroom door. He looked at Emma, at this 8-year-old girl who'd found her courage, who'd guided him through hidden places, who'd lost her mother and might lose her father in the next few minutes. And he made a decision. I'm going to run, Marco whispered. I'm going to run into the hallway, and those guards will chase me. When they do, you get into the bedroom. You get to the panic room. You call for help. Emma's eyes went wide. She shook her head violently, wrote, "No. They'll catch you. Maybe. But if they're chasing me, they're not stopping you." Marco squeezed her hand. You said you wanted to be brave. This is how. You save your dad. You save my mama. You call Agent Morrison and tell him everything. What about you? I'll run into the passages. I know the way to the wine cellar, you showed me. I'll hide until help comes. I'll be okay. He was lying. He had no idea if he'd be okay. But Emma needed to believe it. Emma stared at him, tears streaming down her silent face. Then she hugged him, fierce and quick, and wrote, "You're the bravest person I know." "So are you," Marco said. "Remember that. When you call for help, when you save everyone, remember you were brave enough to do it." He took a deep breath, found the panel release Emma had shown him, and pushed it open. The hallway lay before him. Plush carpet, expensive art, 2 armed guards turning in surprise as a 7-year-old boy stepped out of the wall. "Hey!" Marco shouted, his voice high and carrying. "Looking for me?" Then he ran. The guards reacted instantly, shouting, moving to intercept. Marco ran toward the stairs, away from the bedroom, away from Emma, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could while behind him heavy footsteps pounded in pursuit. "I've got the boy," one guard shouted into his radio. "3rd floor, east wing, heading to the main staircase." Marco hit the stairs and took them 2 at a time, terrified of falling, more terrified of being caught. Behind him, the guards were gaining, adults with longer legs, faster speed, inevitable capture written in every closing step. He reached the 2nd floor landing and made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing down, he dodged right, into a hallway lined with guest rooms, looking desperately for a passage entrance Emma had marked on her map. There, a painting that should swing aside if you pushed the frame's lower corner just right. Marco reached it, pressed, and the panel opened. He threw himself into darkness as the guards rounded the corner, one calling. He went into the walls. "Get a blueprint, I want every passage entrance locked down." Marco ran through blackness, hand trailing the wall for guidance, his breath coming in terrified gasps. Behind him, flashlight beams pierced the passage entrance. They were coming. But Emma had her chance. And that's what mattered. Back in the 3rd floor hallway, Emma stepped out of the passage the moment the guards vanished in pursuit of Marco. Her heart thundered so loud she was sure everyone could hear it, but her feet moved silently across carpet to the master bedroom door. She turned the handle, unlocked. Of course unlocked. Thomas was inside with her father. The bedroom was large, elegant, filled with memories Emma usually avoided. The bed where her mother had slept. The vanity where she'd brushed her hair. The photographs that made Emma's heart crack every time she saw them. And in the corner, Thomas Reeves holding a gun to her father's head. Richard knelt on the floor, blood on his temple from where Thomas had struck him. His eyes went wide when he saw Emma. "No," he breathed. "Emma, run." "She's not running." Thomas smiled, swinging the gun toward Emma. "She's going to be useful." "Hello, Emma. Your father won't open the panic room for his own life. Let's see if he'll open it for yours." Emma stood frozen, every instinct screaming at her to flee. But Marco's words echoed, "You're the bravest person I know." And her own words, written to Marco, "Together is better than alone." She wasn't alone. Marco was buying her time. Her father was still alive. And she had something Thomas didn't know about, something her mother had shown her months before she died, in one of their last private moments. A secondary way into the panic room. Her mother had been paranoid about security, especially after some threats Richard had received. She'd insisted on a backup entrance, a child-sized ventilation shaft that connected through the closet ceiling, accessible if you knew which panel to remove. "Just in case," her mother had said, tapping Emma's nose. "Just in case Daddy's fingerprint doesn't work, or the door jams, or you need to hide very quickly. Our little secret." Their little secret. One Emma had never told anyone, not even after her mother died. One Thomas and Catherine didn't know about. Emma walked slowly into the room, her eyes on her father's bleeding face. She tried to communicate with her eyes. "Trust me. I have a plan." Richard's expression shifted slightly. After months of silence, of watching his daughter retreat inward, he'd learned to read her nuances. He gave the tiniest nod. "Open the panic room, Emma," Thomas said pleasantly. "Your father won't, but I bet you will. You don't want him to die, do you?" Emma shook her head slowly. "Smart girl. Now the closet, the entrance is in there, isn't it? Show me." Emma walked toward the massive walk-in closet, her mind racing. She needed Thomas to follow her. Needed him distracted. Needed just 30 seconds. She stepped into the closet, large as a bedroom itself, lined with her mother's clothes that her father couldn't bear to remove. Thomas followed, gun trained on her, Richard forced along at gunpoint. Where? Thomas demanded. Emma pointed at the back wall, where the panic room entrance was hidden behind a false panel. But she didn't move toward it. Instead, she looked up, at the ceiling, at the ventilation shaft her mother had shown her. Stop stalling, Thomas snapped. Open it now or... Emma moved fast. She grabbed a dress from its hanger, her mother's favorite red silk, and threw it over Thomas's head. It was childish. Ineffective. Bought maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds was enough for Richard to move. He tackled Thomas sideways, the gun discharging wildly, bullet punching through silk and drywall. They crashed into the clothing racks in a tangle of bodies and fabric. Emma, run. Richard shouted. But Emma didn't run. She grabbed the small step stool her mother had kept for reaching high shelves, dragged it to the right position, climbed up, and pushed the ceiling panel aside. The ventilation shaft yawned dark above her. Her mother's voice, just in case. Emma pulled herself up, small enough, light enough, and crawled into the shaft. Behind her, she heard fighting, a gunshot, her father's cry of pain or rage. But she crawled forward through darkness toward where the shaft opened into the panic room itself. Marco ran through the passages blindly, lost now, Emma's map just a memory he couldn't quite hold in his panicked mind. Behind him, the guards crashed through the narrow spaces, their flashlights creating wild shadows. He took a turn, another, descended a staircase, and suddenly recognized where he was, the passage behind the kitchen, the one that connected to the old coal chute Emma had mentioned. Fresh air whispered from ahead. Moonlight through cracks. The service exit. Marco ran toward it, burst through a door, and stumbled into the cold Connecticut night. The ground stretched before him, gardens and trees and security lights creating pools of illumination in the darkness. And there, 30 yards away, Catherine Reeves stood with her phone to her ear, coordinating her teams. She saw him. Emma's fingers found the panel at the end of the ventilation shaft and pushed. It swung inward, and she dropped into the panic room with a soft thud that her feet absorbed. The room was small, barely 10 feet square, but lined with monitors showing security camera feeds from throughout the property. A desk held communication equipment, satellite phone, radio, direct line to emergency services. Everything her father had installed to ensure safety in crisis. Everything Thomas Reeves had planned to destroy. Emma's hands shook as she reached for the satellite phone. She'd never made a call in her life. Her mother had always dialed for her, and after her mother died, Emma had stopped wanting to talk to anyone. But Marco had run into danger to give her this chance. Her father was fighting for his life in the closet beyond the wall. Her mama was somewhere in this house, maybe hurt, maybe worse. Emma lifted the phone. Her fingers trembled over the keypad. She couldn't speak. Couldn't make her voice work even now, even when everything depended on it. But she could press numbers. 911. The phone connected. A voice answered, 911, what's your emergency? Emma's throat closed. No sound came. Hello? 911, what's your emergency? I can hear breathing. Are you in danger? If you're in danger and can't speak, press 1. Emma pressed 1. Okay, I'm showing your location as Ashford Estate, Connecticut. Is that correct? Press 1 for yes. Emma pressed 1, tears streaming down her face. Are there intruders? Press 1 for yes. Are people hurt? Press 1 for yes. Are there weapons? Press 1 for yes. Okay, honey, I'm dispatching police and ambulance now. They're 15 minutes out. Can you stay on the line? Press 1 for yes. Emma pressed 1 and heard the most beautiful words, help is coming. But 15 minutes might be too long. She looked at the other communication equipment. The direct line, her father had said it connected to someone important. She picked up the handset, and a pre-recorded message played, this is the private emergency line for Richard Ashford. If you're calling from the panic room, you've reached FBI Agent Morrison. State your situation. A beep. Emma couldn't speak. But she could do something else. She set the phone down beside the keyboard and began typing, Hunt and Peck, 8-year-old fingers moving as fast as they could. This is Emma Ashford. Man named Thomas Reeves has gun. He works with head of security Catherine Reeves. They killed the Italian guards. They want to kill Dad and Marco's Emma. Marco is running in gardens. Dad is fighting Thomas in bedroom closet. Please help. Please hurry. She hit send, prayed it went through. On the monitors, she could see various angles of the estate. And there on the southeast garden camera, she saw Marco, small and running, his dark hair catching security lights as he dodged between trees. Behind him, 4 guards converged, Catherine Reeves leading them. Emma's silent heart screamed. Marco's lungs burned. His legs felt like they might collapse. He'd reached the garden's far edge, where manicured lawn gave way to natural woods, and he knew if he could just make it into those trees, he might have a chance. 20 more yards. 15. Stop running, Marco. Catherine's voice called behind him, closer than he'd thought. You're only making this harder. 10 yards. He could see the tree line now, darkness and shelter, and something hit him from the side, a full body tackle that drove him into the cold ground. His breath exploded out. He tried to crawl, to fight, but hands gripped him, adult hands, impossibly strong. Got him! The guard shouted. Catherine Reeves appeared above him, her professional facade cracked to show something colder beneath. Clever boy. But not clever enough. She hauled him to his feet. Marco struggled, but she was too strong, her grip bruising on his arm. Your friend Emma, she made it to the bedroom, you know. My father has her now. And in about 5 minutes, when we don't check in with him, he'll kill Richard Ashford, then her, then your mother. Catherine's voice was matter of fact. You tried very hard. But you're 7 years old, and this was never a game you could win. She pulled him back toward the house, guards flanking them. Marco's mind raced desperately for options, for anything, but he was out of tricks, out of bravery, out of sirens. Faint at first, then growing louder. Multiple sirens, coming fast. Catherine stopped, her face shifting from confidence to confusion to dawning alarm. Boss, one of the guards said, pressing his earpiece. We've got multiple police vehicles approaching. An FBI. How did? Emma, Marco breathed. She called for help. Catherine's eyes went cold. She pulled out her phone, dialed. Dad, we've got a problem. Police are coming. You need to finish this now. She stopped. Listened. Marco saw her face go white. Dad? Dad. She lowered the phone slowly. He's not answering. The sirens grew deafening. Through the trees, Marco could see flashing lights approaching on the estate's long driveway, red and blue painting the darkness, beautiful and impossible. Help. Real help. Catherine looked at Marco, at the approaching vehicles, at her team of guards who suddenly looked uncertain. She was calculating odds, Marco realized. Calculating whether killing them all was still possible, whether the timeline could still work. Then her radio crackled. All units, FBI is at the gate. They're demanding entry. What are our orders? Catherine stood frozen for one long moment. Then, with a sound like breaking, she released Marco's arm. Stand down, she said into the radio. All units stand down. It's over. She looked at Marco one last time. You should have stayed invisible, little boy. You've destroyed everything. Good, Marco said. The next 15 minutes were chaos painted in emergency lights. FBI vehicles crashed through the estate's gates, federal agents pouring out in tactical gear. Connecticut State Police followed. Ambulances. More agents in suits. Agent Morrison himself, barking orders, coordinating teams. Marco was swept up by a female agent who wrapped him in a blanket and asked questions he could barely process. Are you hurt? Where are the others? How many hostiles? My mama, Marco managed. And Mr. Ashford. And Emma. Thomas Reeves has them. Master bedroom, 3rd floor. He has a gun. Morrison heard and moved immediately, pulling together a tactical team. They entered the mansion with weapons drawn, moving with practiced efficiency. Marco wanted to follow, but the agent held him gently back. Let them work, honey. They're very good at this. So Marco waited in the cold November night, wrapped in a blanket, watching agents swarm through the house he'd run through in terror just minutes ago. Catherine Reeves was handcuffed, silent now, her face a mask. Her guard surrendered without resistance, hired men who knew when a job had gone bad. Then, through the mansion's front entrance, Marco saw movement. FBI agents emerged, and between them, supporting him on either side, Richard Ashford walked out. His face was battered, one arm hanging at an odd angle, but he was alive. Behind him, more agents, and between them his mama, Elena Santos, her face tear-streaked but unhurt. Mama. Marco tore away from the agent holding him and ran. Elena dropped to her knees, catching him, pulling him into her arms with desperate strength. Mi hijo, she sobbed, switching to Spanish in her relief. Pence kte había perdido. Pence, I thought I'd lost you. I thought. I'm okay, Mama. I'm okay. Marco buried his face in her shoulder, breathing in her familiar scent, letting the terror finally break into tears. Richard approached, supporting his injured arm, his gray eyes finding Marco's. You saved us, he said simply. Again. When Thomas had us, when I thought it was over, Emma appeared. She got into the panic room through some route I didn't even know existed. She called for help. And she did it because you gave her the time and the courage to try. Where is she? Marco asked, looking around. Where's Emma? Still inside. She won't come out until, Richard stopped as Agent Morrison emerged from the mansion. The FBI agent's face was grim. We secured the scene. Thomas Reeves is in custody, minor injuries from the struggle. We found him unconscious in the bedroom closet. Looks like you got in a good hit before Emma escaped, Mr. Ashford. I got in several good hits, Richard said with savage satisfaction. Is he talking? Not yet. But we found his phone, his communications with Silverman, with the overseas accounts that paid Moretti and Castellano. It's enough. Morrison turned to Marco. Son, the 911 operator said someone from the house pressed buttons to communicate. Was that Emma? Marco nodded. She can't talk. But she's brave. She saved everyone. She did. Morrison looked back at the mansion. She's still in the panic room. Won't come out. We've tried talking to her, but... He trailed off helplessly. She's scared, Marco said. She's been scared for a long time. Since her mama died. Can I try? Richard and Morrison exchanged glances. It might help, Richard said quietly. She trusts you. So Marco, still wrapped in his blanket, still shaking from cold and shock, walked back into Ashford House. An agent escorted him through halls he'd run through in terror, upstairs where guards had chased him, to the master bedroom where Thomas Reeves had held a gun to Richard's head. The room was crowded with FBI personnel now, but they parted from Marco as he approached the closet. The panic room door stood open. Richard had keyed it from outside once Emma called for help, but Emma herself was still inside, curled in the corner behind the desk, her notebook clutched to her chest. Marco stepped into the doorway. Emma. She looked up, and her face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled over. It's okay, Marco said softly. It's over. Your dad is safe. My mama is safe. Thomas is in handcuffs. Catherine too. The FBI is here. Real help. Safe help. Emma stared at him, eyes huge and wet. You did it, Marco continued. You were so brave. You climbed through that shaft and you called for help and you saved everyone. You saved your dad. You saved my mama. You saved me. His own voice cracked. You were the bravest person tonight, Emma. The bravest. Emma's lips trembled. She opened her notebook with shaking hands, wrote something, held it up. I was so scared. Me too, Marco admitted. I'm still scared. But we did it anyway. Just like we said we would. Together. Together, Emma wrote. Together, Marco confirmed. He held out his hand. Come on. Your dad wants to see you. He wants to make sure you're really okay. Emma looked at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she uncurled from her corner. She took Marco's hand, cold and small and trembling, and let him lead her out of the panic room. They emerged into the bedroom where FBI agents waited, where evidence was being photographed and collected, where the night's violence had left its marks. And there, leaning against the doorframe because his injuries made standing difficult, Richard Ashford waited for his daughter. Emma ran to him, silent but fast, and he caught her with his good arm, pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. My brave girl, he whispered. My brave, brilliant, beautiful girl. You saved us. You saved us all. Emma shook in his arms, silent sobs racking her small body. But then so quietly that Marco almost missed it, a sound emerged. A whisper. Broken and rusty from disuse, but real. Daddy. Richard froze. His eyes went wide with shock and hope and overwhelming emotion. Daddy, Emma said again, louder now, her voice cracking. I was scared. I was so scared. I know, baby. I know. But you were brave anyway. You were so brave. Richard's tears fell freely now, mixing with his daughter's. I'm so proud of you. Your mama would be so proud of you. Emma pulled back enough to look at him. Marco taught me. He said being brave means being scared, but doing it anyway. Both of them turned to look at Marco, still standing in his borrowed blanket, still shaking from cold and shock and the surreal nature of watching this moment unfold. He's right, Richard said, his voice thick. And Marco knows something about bravery himself. He extended his good arm toward Marco. Come here. Marco moved forward hesitantly. Richard pulled him into the embrace with Emma, the three of them huddled together, a billionaire, his daughter who'd found her voice, and a 7-year-old boy who'd learned that being small didn't mean being powerless. Thank you, Richard whispered into Marco's hair. Thank you for seeing what others missed. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for teaching my daughter that her voice still matters. Elena appeared in the doorway, Agent Morrison beside her. Mi hijo. Mama. Marco pulled away from Richard and Emma and ran back to her. She scooped him up despite him being 7 and too big to be carried, holding him like she'd never let go. We need to get medical on these injuries, Morrison said gently. And we'll need full statements from everyone. But for now. He looked at the small group, at the reunion happening in the aftermath of terror. For now, this is enough. They were taken to the hospital, all of them. Richard's arm was broken, his face required stitches. Elena had bruises from Thomas's rough handling. Marco and Emma were checked thoroughly for injuries, found miraculously unscathed at least physically. The FBI took statements throughout the night and into the morning. Marco recounted everything, overhearing the Italian guards, warning Richard, the service passages, the plan with Emma, his desperate run through the gardens. Emma wrote her version in her notebook, occasionally adding soft-spoken words when writing wasn't enough. Elena held Marco through it all, translating when his exhaustion made English difficult, wiping his tears when the memories became too much. By dawn, the full scope of Thomas Reeves's plan had emerged. 25 years of resentment and planning. The patience to build a security empire just to access Richard Ashford. The callousness to kill his own operatives to cover his tracks. The calculation that placed Catherine in position years before the actual attempt. You destroyed a 25-year plan, Agent Morrison told Marco as the sun rose over the Connecticut estate. You, a 7-year-old boy, undid 2.5 decades of work because you spoke Italian and were brave enough to speak up. And Emma, Marco insisted. Emma saved everyone at the end. And Emma, Morrison agreed, smiling at the girl who sat beside her father, her hand in his, her voice still soft but present. You both did. 3 days later, they returned to the estate, no longer a crime scene but a home trying to heal. Richard insisted they stay. Not as guests, he clarified, sitting with Elena and Marco in the library while Emma showed them her favorite books. As family. Elena, I want to offer you a position managing my charitable foundation's housing initiatives. I need someone who understands what it's like to struggle, to navigate systems designed to keep people invisible. The salary is, well, it's enough that you'll never have to clean another toilet unless you want to. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Senor Ashford, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll let me make sure Marco gets the education he deserves, private tutors, eventually the best schools. Say you'll stay here where you're safe and valued and seen. Richard's voice softened. Say you'll let Emma have the friend who taught her to be brave again. Elena looked at Marco, at her son who'd somehow changed all their lives in the span of 48 hours. What do you think, Mijo? Marco looked around the library, at the thousands of books he could now read freely, at Emma beside him teaching him about her favorites, at Richard who looked at him with gratitude and genuine affection, at his mama who finally looked hopeful instead of perpetually worried. I think yes, Marco said. I think we say yes. So they did. 4 months later. Life had settled into rhythms Marco never imagined possible. He attended a private school now, where teachers learned his name and encouraged his questions. Emma went to the same school, a small class of 12 students, all learning at their own pace. She spoke more each day, her voice growing stronger, though she still carried her notebook for when words felt too hard. Elena managed the foundation from an office in downtown Hartford, coordinating housing programs, working with immigrant communities who reminded her of her own struggles. She was good at it, better than Richard had dared hope. She brought empathy and understanding that couldn't be taught. And Marco had kept up his Sunday video calls with Nana, who cried with joy when he told her how her Italian lessons had saved lives, who told everyone in Naples about her brilliant grandson, who sent him Italian children's books that Emma insisted on reading with him. Marcello, Nana had said on their last call, you did what I always taught you. You made your voice matter. And now you have una famiglia, a family, who hears you. He did have a family. His mama, Richard, Emma, even Margaret who baked him cookies and saved him the best books. A found family, unexpected and precious. The FBI had wrapped up the case. Thomas Reeves was awaiting trial on multiple charges: conspiracy to commit murder, actual murder of Moretti, wire fraud, racketeering. Catherine Reeves had taken a plea deal, testimony against her father in exchange for a reduced sentence. The security firm they'd operated had collapsed, its reputation destroyed. But sometimes, late at night when Marco couldn't sleep, he remembered Thomas's words, "You should have stayed invisible, little boy. You've destroyed everything." He destroyed a plan. Saved lives. But had he destroyed everything? It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when Richard called Marco into his office. Emma was there too, looking nervous. What's wrong? Marco asked immediately. Nothing's wrong. Exactly. Richard pulled up something on his computer. But Agent Morrison called. They finished analyzing all of Thomas's communications, his financial records, everything. And they found something troubling. He turned the screen. Marco saw what looked like financial statements, account numbers, transfers. Thomas Reeves funded the initial attempt on my life, Richard explained. But these transactions, he pointed to a series of payments. These came from somewhere else. A shell corporation that Morrison's team traced back to, well, they don't know yet. The accounts go through 7 different countries, all with strong banking privacy laws. Emma gripped Marco's hand. She whispered, "What does it mean?" "It means Thomas didn't work alone." "Not really." Richard's face was grim. "Someone else wanted me dead. Someone with resources that dwarf what Thomas had access to. Someone who helped him plan this, who provided additional funding, who..." He stopped, choosing words carefully. "Who might still want to finish the job." Marco felt ice in his stomach. But Thomas is in jail. Catherine is in jail. The guards are caught. Who? That's what the FBI is trying to figure out. Richard closed the laptop. Morrison has increased our security, real security this time, agents I've worked with for years, people he personally vouches for. But until they identify who else was involved. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Emma wrote in her notebook, "We're still in danger?" We don't know, Richard said honestly. Maybe. Maybe whoever it was has backed off now that the plan failed. Or maybe. He stopped again. Marco's mind raced. He thought about patterns, about what he'd learned. Thomas had planned for 25 years. He'd been patient, methodical. But someone else had been watching, funding, waiting even longer. The car accident, Marco said suddenly. Emma's mama. The one that started all this, that made you vulnerable. Was it investigated? Richard's face went pale. It was ruled an accident. Brake failure on a mountain road. But if someone was planning this for longer than Thomas, Marco continued, his 7-year-old mind working through terrible possibilities, if someone wanted you vulnerable, wanted you to need security that Thomas could provide. Jesus, Richard breathed. They might have killed Claire. Killed my wife to set everything in motion. His hands clenched on the desk. Morrison, I need every detail of that accident investigated again. Every mechanic who touched that car, every. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. Richard Ashford. Hello, Richard. The voice was male, older, with an accent Marco couldn't quite place. I apologize for Thomas's failure. He was supposed to be more competent than that. But his emotional investment in revenge made him sloppy. Richard's face went white. He gestured frantically at Emma and Marco, go leave now, but both of them were frozen. Who is this? Richard demanded. Someone who's been waiting much longer than 25 years. Someone who understands that patience is the ultimate weapon. A pause. Thomas wanted revenge for a stolen algorithm. How petty. I want something much more valuable. I want your cooperation. Your company. Your technology. And I'm willing to wait as long as necessary to get it. What do you want? Richard's voice was carefully controlled. Right now? Nothing. I'm simply calling to let you know that the game isn't over. Thomas was move 1. A failed move, admittedly. I underestimated the clever little boy who speaks Italian. I won't make that mistake again. Marco's blood froze. The voice knew about him. You leave the children alone, Richard growled. They have nothing to do with. They have everything to do with it now. The boy who saved your life. The daughter who found her voice. Your housekeeper who's become your foundation manager. The voice was pleasant, conversational, and somehow more terrifying for it. I know everything about them, Richard. Where they go to school. What route Elena drives to work. What time Margaret walks her sister's dog. Who are you? Richard's voice shook with barely controlled rage. I'm the person you stole much more from than an algorithm, many years ago. But don't waste time trying to figure it out. Your past has too many victims. A soft laugh. I'll be in touch when I'm ready for move 2. Until then, try to keep your found family safe. The line went dead. Silence filled the office. Marco, Emma, and Richard stared at each other, the March sunlight streaming through windows suddenly feeling cold. Richard immediately dialed Agent Morrison. We need protection detail increased immediately. Someone just called and threatened. Yes, I'm recording it, sending it now. No, I don't recognize the voice. No, they didn't make demands yet. But. Emma tugged Marco's sleeve, showed him her notebook. I'm scared again. Marco squeezed her hand, trying to be brave, trying to believe his own words. We'll be okay. We were brave once. We'll be brave again. But even as he said it, he wondered. Thomas Reeves had been patient for 25 years. This new enemy had been patient even longer. And they knew everything, where they lived, where they went to school, who they loved. Marco looked out the window at the estate's grounds, at the gardens where he'd run for his life, at the trees budding with spring growth. Somewhere out there, an unknown enemy watched and waited. And Marco was 7 years old, brave, yes, but still just 7 years old. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? An enemy who'd proven they were willing to wait decades for revenge? As Agent Morrison's voice crackled through the speakerphone, discussing increased security and investigation priorities, Marco felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Their story wasn't over. It had barely begun. 6 days later. Marco sat in the estate's library, trying to focus on homework but mostly staring out the window at the doubled security patrols. Emma sat beside him, equally distracted, her notebook open but empty of writing. Do you think they'll ever find who it is? Emma asked quietly. Her voice was still soft, still uncertain, but growing stronger each day. I hope so, Marco said. Agent Morrison has people working on it. Your dad hired private investigators too. They'll figure it out. But neither of them sounded convinced. Margaret brought afternoon snacks, cookies and milk, and paused when she saw their faces. You two look like you're carrying the weight of the world. We kind of are, Emma said. Margaret set down the tray and settled into a chair across from them. Let me tell you something my mother used to tell me and my sister. Evil people think patience is their weapon. But good people have patience too. And good people have something evil people don't, community. People who care. People who watch out for each other. She gestured around the room. You have your father, Emma. You have your mother, Marco. You have each other. You have the FBI, private security, 2 communities that love you. That man on the phone? He's alone. Loneliness makes you make mistakes. Thomas wasn't alone, Marco pointed out. He had Catherine. And they both got caught, Margaret countered. Because they thought wealth and planning made them untouchable. But you know what stopped them? She smiled. A 7-year-old boy who paid attention and an 8-year-old girl who was brave enough to find her voice. The smallest people made the biggest difference. Emma looked at Marco. He looked back. And slowly, both of them smiled. Margaret was right. They'd been brave once. They'd won once. And if they had to be brave again, well, together was better than alone. Marco and Emma's journey is far from over. Someone dangerous is still out there, watching, waiting, planning their next move. What do you think will happen next? Who do you think is behind this larger conspiracy? Drop your theories in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.